people talk about the success, it's almost they're talking about somebody else and not talking about me.
Steve Redgrave, 5 times Olympic gold medalist rower.
One of Britain's most decorated sportsmen.
Where did the determination side, where did it come from?
Journalists will say that's what you've always wanted in your career. No, at the beginning of my career, I wanted the opportunity to possibly win one. 5 just happened to be, but to me, I was trying to win a gold medal that was out there to be won.
How has part 2 been for you?
It was when the cauldron went out at the Paralympics. And I asked the question almost immediately to myself, that, okay, that is it. What are you going to do now? Got clinically depressed from that. Being a bloke, we don't talk about it, just carry on as normal.
How did you deal with it?
A close friend of mine directed me to a company called I'm a lot more comfortable in my own skin now.
Have you found being famous isolating?
It's a very difficult question to answer because...
So Steve Redgrave, thank you so much for joining us here on the Privileged Man podcast.
Good to see you. I'm looking forward to it.
Good stuff. Well, as I've had Andrew Strauss and Tim Henman on here before, and before we get into the meat of the conversations like I did with them, I'd love to just ask you a few quick fire questions around rowing, if that's cool with you.
Yeah, I'll try to. I'm a good waffler, so I'll try and make them as quick as I can.
Okay. Well, what was your favourite race?
Favourite race is an interesting one. I can sort of split that into 2 parts. Henley Royal Regatta is my local event. I live in Marlow in Buckinghamshire. Henley Royal Regatta is the next town upriver. Something that I'm involved still today, but I love racing there because it is just full of colour. Everybody that comes along gets dressed up. It's their club blazers from around the world. An international regatta, you may get a couple of hundred people coming to watch. A World Championships will just be getting into the thousands. Olympic Games a little bit more than that. Sort of, I think reports in London was 35,000 people that came along. Within Henley, with the regatta, the police report, so there are 300,000 people that come to Henley Regatta Week. So for a rower, it's the closest that you'll ever get to competing in a stadium. It's packed from start to finish. We race over just over a mile and a quarter, and that 2 lanes. So international lane is 6. So it's very intimate to the bank. Great for the rowers, great for the crowd, full of colour and excitement. Just love racing there, and obviously being the local event is that we didn't really race very much in the UK, so it was the opportunity of family, friends to come along and the sort of British public to actually get us to see us racing live.
Yes.
Within the sport, you're always looking for perfection, and the closest I ever got in that with the 20, 25, 30 years that I was competing was probably the World Championships in St Catherine's in 1999, which was the qualifying regatta for the Sydney Games. Not that we were concerned about the qualification, but just everything fell into place during the race-wise. We hit all our sort of rhythm points and the flow. It's the nearest that we ever got and I ever got within my rowing career as perfection. So they're the 2 events that stick out in my mind.
Awesome, that's really interesting. After 5 Olympics, and the perfection one was in the World Championships.
Yeah, especially when I was rowing the years with Matthew Pinson, is that we always performed better in the bigger events. So
Right.
World Championships, you're competing against the same people that will be competing at the Olympics the following year. We have a World Championships every year apart from Olympic year. So that sort of takes over of that. So nothing really changes apart from the magnitude of the event. When I won my first Olympics, a past British Olympian from 1948, because that was the last rowing gold medal before we won in '84, they said, you're world champion for 1 year, you're Olympic champion for life. And that really does sum up the difference between a World Championships and Olympics. It resonates with a lot more people. I remember in London 2012, obviously I wasn't racing, But someone said to me, "Oh, why isn't there more rowing on TV? It's really exciting." And I said, "The World Championships have been shown by the BBC every year since 1981, but nobody watches it. But the Olympics, everyone turns on for it because there is an expectation and a process." And people are quite surprised at that in some ways.
Beautifully put. I mean, I could put my hand up and say that is me too, in terms of my of when I've been watching the rowing. That's really interesting. So the quick fire questions. Let's get back to then.
That's taken nearly 10 minutes for one.
Well, I'll be picky about them. Who is your biggest rival?
Obviously, competing for a very long time, but that sort of changed through the process. So at the beginning, it was as a country, East Germany. They dominated the sport when I was first getting into the sport internationally. So any country that could beat East Germany were looked upon as sort of blaze setters. From that, I rode in a Cox pair with Andy Holmes. The first World Championship win was in that, and the two Italian brothers, the Abagnale brothers, who won 2 Olympics and finished second in their last one they did. And that it's funny because the three boats I'm going to mention are all brothers. So the Pimenov brothers, who were the sort of outstanding pairs crew coming through the sort of 80s. After the dominance of the Landvoigt brothers from East Germany, which I didn't get to race, but the Pimenovs were the sort of next, and they had the disappointment of not going to the LA Games, which probably would have been their games that they would have won Olympic gold medal, but because of the boycotts, they didn't go to that. And then domestically, it would be of Johnny and Greg Searle, again 2 brothers that won the Cox pair in 92 in Barcelona, beating the Abagnales to that silver medal. That's knocking them off their Olympic perch. But they used to push us very hard around that sort of early 90s. So kept us on our toes, and both boats won gold medal in Barcelona. So it was good for British rowing.
Yeah, awesome. Greg will like that. I've actually got him coming on the podcast in a couple of weeks.
All right, great. Of being rivals with each other, you might be able to ask him this, is that he was brought up in sort of the Hampton area, went to Hampton School. Johnny's brother was a few years older. But when he retired, he moved into Marlow, and the first house that they found that they rented was in a place called Redgrave Place. Which mortified him, but now we're very good friends. We play golf at the same golf club and play reasonably often with each other, so we're good mates.
Awesome. Who wins that battle?
I've got a slightly better handicap, but can't play to it, so he beats me normally.
Okay, sounds familiar. Good stuff. And talking of teammates, or I guess, who is your? It's probably a difficult one for you to answer this, but who is the team you most enjoyed being with? Of
rowing with Matthew for 10 years, Matt Pinson, of every partner that I had, especially at Olympic level, sort of changed the face of the world. As I was saying at the beginning of it, it was the sort of East Germany. So in that Cox 4 with Adrian Ellison as Cox, Martin Cross, who'd won a Olympic bronze medal before in 1980, Richard Budgett and Andy Holmes, is that very few Western crews beat East Germany at that time. So to beat them, to break the world record, was pretty amazing, and started to show to the Western world that that East Germany were beatable. But that was really short-lived in some ways. It was only together for a very short period of time. I did carry on rowing with Andy for another 2-3 years after that, and we competed at the next Olympics with each other, and that was pretty special. But when I rowed with Matt, who's 8 years younger than me, is that we became sort of serial winners, and that really did change the face of us. Everyone loved sort of a Western crew winning, and then you sort of get to winning a little bit too more often than people would like. You sort of almost become East German-like and the hated figures. By the time we got through to Sydney and the Sydney Olympics with Tim Foster and James Cracknell joining us, is that it almost went full circle. An interesting story on just after the semi-finals day is that I was walking around in the boating area. On the boating area is the family and friends of Grandstand, and there was a corridor that they walked relatively close to where the boat park was. And this quite big guy sort of waved at me, and for some reason I went over and chatted to him, and he was a Kiwi, and he said, of what you're doing is just fantastic, is that I really want you to win, but I've got one problem. You're racing my son. My parents followed me around most of my career, and they were always friends with families that we were racing, but they would never have said anything like that. They always wanted the crews that I was in to win. But that was sort of the unique thing about Sydney, is it transcended bigger than of the sport itself. Is we were at Penrith, so 45 minutes drive out of Sydney. So not the easiest place to get to, but there was a lot of athletes from a lot of sports that wanted to be there on that day because they felt that history was being made.
Amazing. Absolutely. Well, I remember it, even though I was 18 at the time, but I do remember it.
Things like that.
And that might bleed very quickly into the final question I've got for you around the quick fires, which is, what is your most memorable Olympic moment?
Depends what you mean by Olympic moment. Is that something that I was involved in, or of anything within the Olympics?
I guess I was pointing towards the 5 gold medals, but I mean, right. whatever you view as.
My sporting hero was Mark Spitz. I was a 10-year-old when he was competing in Munich, where he won 7 gold medals. And each one of those gold medals were won in a world record time. And as a 10-year-old, didn't know what rowing was at that point, but knew what the Olympics was, and thought, God, wouldn't it be fantastic to be able to go to Olympics and possibly stand on a rostrum once in your career? So Mark sort of inspired me from that. But Sydney was pretty special. Last of my 5 Olympics that I competed at, but you sort of put yourself into a bubble on the other side of the world. We were sort of aware of the impact it was making back at home, but that didn't really become apparent until you came home. Atlanta, the games before, Great Britain only won 1 gold medal, and that was Matthew and I in the pair. And the success that the whole British team had in Sydney was pretty special. And Matthew and I had a conversation with each other after Atlanta, saying it's tough on British sport, but this will be good for Matt and Steve. But the whole country was a little bit on a downer because we hadn't done that well, even though previous games to that we only won a maximum of five gold medals for the 3 games before that, and less than that before the 2 before that. So it's not like we were prevalent of winning sort of hundreds of medals and opportunities. But after Sydney, we felt, okay, that other sports, more sort of media-friendly sports, they're going to get more of the limelight. And the fact is, it wasn't. It is that we were the pinnacle of what happened, and it was amazing to be part of. And came back through the airport after Atlanta, there was nobody there, which is not unusual from us coming back from major championships, Olympics or World Championships. But Sydney, it was just absolutely packed, and it was just an amazing atmosphere. You see of other sports that when they're returning from success of that sort of event, and that's the first time Olympic sports or of our sport of rowing has ever had that. So it was pretty special.
Amazing. Amazing. Do you feel, I mean, it gives me goosebumps when you're talking about it. Do you still feel that, or do you feel a bit detached from it now?
I do quite a lot of motivational speaking,
Yeah.
and certain days, certain topics is that the sort of emotional will come back to me, but not about the race itself. And sort of quite blinded to that in some ways. It's when people talk about the success, it's almost they're talking about somebody else, not talking about me. I can see it as a third person in some ways, but when you deep into the emotion and the trauma and the difficulty that you come through. One story comes to mind of where I nearly gave up the sport because it was just becoming too tough with diabetes and colitis. Is that I was on a training camp in South Africa, and that we were on a land-based camp, so doing a lot of cycling. I was getting left behind in the gym on the ergos and weights, and everything was becoming really very tough. And I sort of convinced myself that I was out on the bike one time. We'd be out every morning, a sort of 3 hour session. Probably took me nearly 4 hours a session, and I was convinced when I got back to the hotel, I was going to pack my bag and leave. That I was just proving every training session I wasn't the athlete that I thought I was. And you need to improve for every Olympics, and I seem to be going backwards, not going forwards. And after Atlanta, it was well documented that my wife wanted me to retire. She's also the team doctor, still is the team doctor now, with the team that's heading towards Paris. And it's really sort of I remember phoning home and saying, that's it, it's all over. And that conversation says, we'll find a way through this, we'll find a way through. And even talking about it now, I can feel the emotion sort of flowing. It's when you get down to that personal elements, and the sacrifice that you have to make, but other people around you as well. It becomes a lot bigger than being very selfish of just doing what you enjoy doing and trying to have fun and going as fast as you can in a boat, which is a bit weird in the first place.
Thank you for sharing that. I mean, where did, just coming back a couple of steps from that and the determination side, which obviously you have in like superhuman spades, where did that come from? Where did this like win at all costs, compete at all costs? Where did it come from?
Well, I wouldn't like to use the term of win at all costs, because that could tip over the edge into areas that of cheating and of that. It was always very important to me. I was I am heavily dyslexic and struggled at school, and sort of first reports when I started winning races is that was because that you struggled at school. And I'm not sure if it was, but in hindsight, looking back, there is an element. Everyone's always looking for something that they can do well. Not everyone's going to be able to be a world champion and the best in their field, but everyone can be the best they can possibly be. And that's what I was trying to be. So from very early age is that down at my club at Marlow, where I rode for Great Marlow School, from there, we had a number of international athletes and a number of international coaches. And they were saying to me, oh, you could potentially be a world champion. And when people start telling you that at the age of sort of 16, 17, that actually motivates you. And I sort of changed that around pretty quickly. And I thought, well, world champion sounds nice. Why not Olympic champion? So probably by the age of 16, certainly by the age of 17, I'd worked out a very loose plan of how I was going to go about this within the sport. And I'd probably go to 3 Olympics, Moscow, LA, and Seoul was going to be the one that I'd potentially win my Olympic gold medal. There was a boycott in Moscow. Great Britain did go, but America, West Germany, New Zealand, a couple of other countries didn't. Most of our funding in those days came from American-based companies, so they all withdrew. So Great Britain sent a smaller team. I was only 18 at that point, so just coming on to the senior team and more at the bottom end of it. And so we'd made the qualifying time but didn't go. So huge disappointment on that. Very bitter and twisted even today that didn't have that opportunity. But that adds to the fuel that next time around you're going to make the most of it. So that was one of the 3 games that got taken away from me. The next one, we won a gold medal, so that sort of changed the whole process. And people say, how can you be bitter about not going to the Olympics beforehand? But most athletes get the opportunity of going to 1, possibly 2. There's a few of us that take that to extreme, and I certainly took that to extreme at Olympic level. And taking that opportunity around through politics, sport and politics shouldn't mix. It obviously does, and always will. But I suppose that's where part of the motivation came, is that there was the World Championships in France, Aiguebelette, in '97. A French journalist did an article on me, and it came out. And he picked about 7 or 8 different categories and marked them out of 10. And I didn't have a 10 in any of the categories. And I thought, I'm supposed to be the best rower around at this time. Matt Pinson and I were the sort of the standout crew of all the boats that are around at that point. And how can you get a 10? And then I sort of reflected on it a few months later. And the sort of 8 categories he picked was technique, endurance, of power, and I didn't hit 10. He was probably right, but I was 8 and 9s across the board. Where you look at other athletes, they might have a 10 in a certain category, but of 7s or 6s in other categories. So the total number added up at the end of the column was more than anybody else, and that's where the standout was. So I didn't have the sort of I had to work hard, very hard, for what I achieved. And so if you want to work hard for it, is that the more you put in, the more you get out of it. And so that's where the work ethic came, and of the opportunities, and trying to raise your game for the bigger events, because that's obviously what counts more than anything else. So that was sort of more of the driving force. And also, I was very good at putting the results, good or bad, or certainly good, behind me, and not really taking that much notice of them. Trying to improve from the bad, and moving forward to make sure that it is. So in Sydney, when people were saying you're going for your 5th gold medal, that's journalists would say that's what you've always wanted in your career. No, at the beginning of my career, I wanted the opportunity to possibly win 1. And 5 just happened to be. But to me, I was trying to win a gold medal that was out there to be won. Yes, in total it made 5, but that wasn't the motivating factor. It was trying to win that race in front of me, not living on what I'd done before.
Yeah, amazing. And it's amazing. Like, yeah, that all makes a lot of sense. And what's coming up for me is just like, well, who is behind this man? Who your parents? There must be some kind of grit, or there must be some kind of story to bring up a man with your mindset.
And especially sort of coming through the era of sports that I came through as sort of we almost had an embarrassment of being successful. The Brits wanted to be able to compete, but not the embarrassment of winning. And I suppose Olympic teams are very sort of made up of privileged backgrounds, very high educated, middle class, very few working class. That has changed a great deal now, but certainly of the era that I was starting to come through. And I was at a small comprehensive school in Marlow, so not the traditional background of the sports. The head of the English department had two loves. One was rugby, the other was rowing. The school didn't offer either of the sports. We were a football school. I was the reserve goalkeeper. It was only because I was big and pretty clumsy, but I could fill most of the goal. So, if we needed a reserve goalkeeper, I was your man. And Francis used to look at the size of people's hands and feet as they came in as students. Simple physics, showing my education, because it took me 10 years to work this one out. Rowing is a leverage sport, because where the blade goes into the water, you're levering the boat past that position. Now, what it looks like and what it feels like in a boat is you're putting the blade through the water and pulling it through the water. If that's the boat doesn't go anywhere. So we tend to be quite tall people, long levers, can reach further. As I say, simple physics. I was brought up in a family of a building business, so relatively strong in the days that you unloaded brick lorries by hand. So I can remember as a 12-year-old helping my dad unload brick lorries and sort of probably building up a bit of strength because of that. And that sort of helped within the sport. But the sport is more endurance based than power based. But if you've got that power, explosive speed, is that you can change a race in a matter of strokes. So there's a bit of an advantage from that point of view. But my parents were very supportive of me. Obviously, working class backgrounds. My mother's father was in. My mother was brought up in Birmingham, and he drove trams and buses for 40 years in Birmingham. And so that was his sort of background. My father my grandfather on my father's side moved into Marlow. High Wycombe is the furniture capital of Great Britain. I don't think we make very much in High Wycombe anymore, but there's quite a few of the head offices of the big furniture companies are still based around the area. And my grandfather was a carpenter, and so that that's where sort of my dad got more into the building business. Escaped from home as early as he could, went to the Merchant Navy, but of my eldest sister, who's 9 years older than me, is that she had it quite tough of coming out of school. We all went to the same comprehensive, and that my parents say, "Well, what do you want to do?" And she said, "Well, I want to be a beautician." So how are you going to go about that? She says, "Well, there's this really good college I could go to." And so I said, "Okay, we'll help you go there." And after 2 years of studying there, is that right? Okay, now you're going to go to work. My other sister went more into accounts, went on to sixth form college, but didn't really have a lot of motivation at that time. Even though both of them were pretty good sports people. My eldest sister was quite a good runner. My other sister was a very good backstroke swimmer, but there was no opportunities of taking that further. And I suppose because I was much younger than them, and my parents were getting more to retirement age, is that their attitude of life had changed. They sort of a changed status symbol, if you want to put things into status of more working class to middle class. And that my mother taught all three of us how to drive, and to earn money to keep me rowing, she became a driving instructor. Taught most of the people of a certain generation in Marlow how to drive, but a motivating factor was to earn money to keep me rowing. So I had great support from my parents on that. It wasn't, all right, you need to go and find a job now. You've got a skill within this, and we would like to support as far as we possibly can with that. That also adds in different pressures, because when things start going wrong, you feel that you're doing it for other people and not doing it for yourself. And of sort of 80, 86, 85, 86, things started going a bit pear-shaped for me. I'd won Olympic gold medal, so I'd done what I wanted to do within the sport. On the overall picture side of it. And I went to my parents to tell them I was going to give up the sport, expecting to get a verbal clip round the ear. And I got the complete opposite. My mother was always the driving force and the one that would speak. And she said, "We think you're stupid, but if that's the avenue you want to go, we're fully supportive," which I wasn't expecting to hear at all. And that actually did the right thing, is that then I sort of assessed. I went off and did some bobsleighing for a while, competed at the British Bobsleigh Championships and a couple of World Cup races, which is very, very different training and preparation to rowing. And it was while I was out there, and I'm thinking, well, I'm quite good at sport of rowing. Why am I trying to do something else? Why don't you go back? And that was really one of the turning points in my career of bringing back that focus and desire, and of being quite selfish, that I was doing it a lot for myself, but obviously people around you get the benefits from that as well.
Amazing. It always seems to be like a parent or parents and the backstory of phenomenal success, and it seems as though and ones that just know how to manage their children, even when
I
they're
think
not
there's quite a lot to do with school teachers as well. Never underestimate the power of education in the early days. If you speak to most Olympians, yes, their parents have been pretty supportive of them, but it's somebody mainly at school that has given them the focus, and that was very much of me. I used to love sport. I used to hate education for obvious reasons. And a teacher coming up and saying, "Would you like to try rowing?" Well, going out during games lesson, out of school, going down to the river. Oh, yes, please. I'll have some of that. And that was no dream about of trying to be the best in the world. That was just escapism of getting out of a place that I didn't really like, being in maths and English classes.
Yeah, but I totally get that side. Like I was diagnosed with dyslexia aged 8, and that's a big part of my story. I've talked about lots in different podcasts before. But yeah, no, getting out to football, playing cricket, playing in breaks, throwing a tennis.
We had 4 houses at school, and especially in the summer, even though that we weren't really a cricket at school, we used to have house cricket. And even if our house wasn't playing, I would try and get myself as being the scorer or involved in some way. So because cricket matches take a little bit longer than most other sports, is that got me out of lessons, and so I would manipulate the system to try and of benefit a way forward in getting out of things that I didn't really like doing.
Yeah. It really resonates. I remember we used to play on Saturdays, and I had double economics on a Saturday morning, and in the first 11 you had to leave lessons at 10 o'clock, and double economics was always between sort of 10 o'clock and 12. So I did my best to get into the first 11, stay in the first 11 for as long as possible, just to miss a miserable double economics class.
There's got to be motivation of some sort.
Yeah, I also really enjoyed it as well. But yeah, well, changing gears a bit, Steve, from the success, I guess, of part 1 or chapter 1 of your life, your rowing, and all of the huge amount of success that came with that. How has part 2 been for you? Has that been tell us about that. And I think some of your struggles have been documented. I think that's where I'm angling towards. How have you managed to deal with that?
I suppose the beginning of with part 2 also carried on the Olympic dream. So when I retired from competing in 2000, I met up with the chief executive and chair of the British Olympic Association in London, just literally a few weeks after the games. And we sat out in a cafe on the street in London, and they said, we're thinking about competing for bringing the Olympics to London. One, I was disappointed that if we ever got it, that I wouldn't be able to compete in it, which would have been absolutely amazing of a home games. But of course, jumped straight onto that bandwagon. I was the 4th person to get involved in that. So of with them two and a hockey player that they'd sent out to Sydney to assess behind the scenes if it's something that London that we could put together. So I sort of a lot of people get sort of not disillusioned, but sort of struggle to get back into normal life after a sporting career. That you have to put so much time and dedication into it, and then suddenly it ends. And at that point, it wasn't an end for me. It was almost another beginning. Still revolved around the Olympics, but not competing myself, and that was pretty special of being on the presenting panel in Singapore in 2005 when we won the bid, and then going on to delivering the games and being part of that was pretty special. As I said, that it would have been fantastic to compete at the games, but I had the best of both worlds because relatively it was still relatively close to when I was competing, so I was still well known from what I was doing, and almost was still be getting the accolades of achieving around 2012. So I didn't have to do the hard work. I didn't have to sort of put my neck on the line of racing and the pressure. But you still get treated like Olympic champion around the games, and that was pretty special. I must admit. But it was when the cauldron went out at the Paralympics. I was actually home watching it on TV. The flame dies down and goes out, and I asked the question almost immediately to myself: okay, that is it. That is the Olympic dream now of fully over. You've taken it in many different ways to extremes to them. What are you going to do now? And there's an emptiness. There is sort of what am I going to do? I suppose without a strong education to fall back on. I was 50 in 2012, so of trying to start a career. Of being brought up on building sites. Am I going to go back into the building? So I've been out of it for a very, very, very long time, and done quite a lot of physical work on in my early days on that. But I did really want to go get my hands dirty and laying bricks and doing all the things within the building industry. So you do ask questions, and I sort of got a clinically depressed from that. It's difficult of getting out of that sort of process and working out what you're going to. Relatively, you're still young. Yes, I was 50, which is not a spring chicken, but still got time on my hands. That I did struggle, and of being a bloke, we don't talk about it. We bottle it up and sort of just carry on as normal. And of course, things do materialise. BBC still wanted me to help them at Olympic Games. Still doing motivational speeches, of doing appearances, and very involved in charity. So there's still lots of things that I was involved with, but there was no sort of really driving force of an end goal to get to. And basically, from a 14-year-old, I'd always had end goals to get to, mainly in sport or around sport, and suddenly that it's not there. There's actually, I don't know what the figures are, but American sports, especially their team sports, American football, baseball, and basketball, there's quite a lot of above average suicides in those sports, even though that they're extremely well paid for what they did, which rowing certainly wasn't, because there wasn't anything. When I coached in China for a few years, is that they were interested because they're on bonus schemes of what did you earn from being an Olympic athlete, winning 5 times? That's got to be incredible. And I've gave them a little bit of lateral thinking. I said, well, it's the same value in every currency. And the bright ones worked it out pretty quickly, 0. And the other ones that have got there eventually, but they were very much driven about the finances of what they could do, and that wasn't the driving force within the sport or my own process. But there's a lot of suicide in those sports because they're gifted from a very early age of being involved in a team. They don't really have to think too much for themselves other than improving themselves as an athlete. When you're moving around the country or around the world, you move as a group. Everything is sort of I've done for you. For me, with rowing trips, you've got a sheet of what time you're traveling. Yes, you've got to get yourself to the airport, but once you've got yourself to the airport, is that then you're in a group. And even now, if I'm traveling in a group, I very rarely sort of check of what gate I'm flying from or of anything like that, because you're just in a crowd and you sort of go around. When I'm traveling on my own, then I have to think a little bit more about it. But I think that sort of helps in some ways of describing the sort of the difficulties of when things have been organised in a certain way. And I was slightly different because I came through an era where I had to do quite a lot of the planning and the preparation and the organising of getting to the level that I did. It wasn't as a routine as the rowing team is now, but there was still this part of being part of a team. And then suddenly that's all finished and over. And mentally, I struggled to do with that, and took a while to sort of get to grips with that and be open about of the depression that you have in these circumstances.
Thank you for being so open about it. I mean, you mentioned suicide. Did you go towards even having those thoughts?
I think those thoughts were around. That of life relatively was pretty good. Of being a father, that of not having a family around me may have been a bit different. But my kids were born, all of them, when I was still competing, and so that you're of those sort of aspects are there, but they're not real reality.
Yeah.
I'd like to believe in some ways, because that of being in a sport where there's no financial rewards, you've got to work. So where I talk about those American sports, they've probably earned enough money. They don't really have to work again in their lives, and that can cause some of the problems. So yeah, you do have to get out of bed. You do have to go and do some work and earn a living to be able to pay for the mortgage and put food on the table for other people that are relying on you to do that.
I think so many people can resonate with that. I can resonate with that, as in the thoughts are there, but the actual execution, to use probably a bad word, is not necessarily, the intent is not necessarily there. And I think there's a big difference. There is a big difference between the two. Certainly in my experience, there is. Thank you for sharing that. It's very powerful. And what were I guess, moving just forward a little bit, how did you then, or how do you still feel depressive thoughts? Is it still something you're dealing with, or have you found ways in which to deal with it?
I think I found ways to coping with it. Understanding of the whole process is a good part of that. One of my friends was trying to motivate me in some ways, and they said, I've got to pay a sheet of A4, fold it in half again, and if you can, half again. Then that gets quite difficult, that, and then opening up, you've got a number of all these squares, and then those squares relate to a number of years for each square. You colour in the ones that you've lived already. There's only a few left, and you're thinking, that's motivation. And of course, the point he was trying to get across is there isn't very many left. Of make sure you're making the most of that. I'm a glass half empty. I'm thinking there's not much time left. How depressing's that? And so that was a quite interesting process. But a close friend of mine directed me to a company called Ted's Health, there's a lot of talk about the female menopause and the changes in their lives, and men obviously don't have that, but that there are more mental processes that can be. But one of the things that males do have, the older you become, the less testosterone you produce. So Ted's Health was of a simple blood test and monitoring your blood, and this guy was relating it to mental health and the process. And so I thought, well, simple enough to go and do, and so I took the blood test, and my testosterone levels were very, very low. That obviously, being an athlete, you go through of thousands of anti-doping tests throughout your career, but they never tell you what the results are. You only find out if there's positive. Unfortunately, I never had any issues of there. So I don't know if I was competing with low testosterone, or in older age my testosterone has been slipping away more than most. But every male goes through this process, and of course that doesn't help self-esteem, confidence, and sort of get up and go driving. So I've been with Ted's Health and working with them for a couple of years now, of promoting of males to get themselves checked out. I do have an injection of testosterone every 3 months to sort of boost me back up to sort of normal levels. And I don't know if it's the fact of having more testosterone in my system, or of knowing the process about it a little bit more. But I'm a lot more comfortable in my own skin now than I was before, and of enjoying life, or trying to enjoy life, which we all should be. We shouldn't be thinking about those last few squares on that sheet of paper, or we should be thinking about it of how we're going to get the most of them and not the least out of them.
That's really interesting. And so it's actually something that, 42, I've been tested, and also have been dealing with it, but I'm dealing with it at the moment through mostly diet, and I've changed my exercise routine. I used to run a lot. I used to do a lot of cardio work. I'm now doing weights. Trying to bulk up age 42 for the first time. But
I'm trying to bulk down. One of my problems is competing for 20, 30 years is that at the highest level, where you're training 2, 3, sometimes 4 training sessions in a day, and you're doing that from the age of 14 through to the age of nearly 40, it's difficult. Difficult to let that go, but then it's also difficult. Let's go to the gym. Let's go and do some exercise. No, thank you. I've done that. So that weight gain has become an issue. So it's all those sort of things that are all related to the aging process that we have to deal with in some ways or other.
Yeah, sure. And is the testosterone the injections? I mean, you talk about having a little. I can't exactly remember the word you just used, but effectively it's been helpful. I mean, is that? Do you find almost instantly it's been mentally helpful, or do you find it's just all physically helpful? Which one do you find?
I think both. I think both in some ways. Is that of if, like men that we tend to do, is bottle things up and don't like talking about it very much. It gives the opportunity, and that if the things that you've been concerned about and hiding away, of certainly then bringing up and being able to discuss. Well, my health has been in the public domain most of my career, of coming down with diabetes, and being doorstepped by the journalists the day after I was diagnosed, before even family and friends had known that I was diabetic. That it's always been out there, so I don't have a problem of talking about of mental health, or of other health issues that I've had. I do feel that of when you're in the public eye a little bit, is that that your issues can help other people with their issues. I would have liked to have had somebody that I could have looked up and spoke to about the things that I'd been going through after the 2012 Olympics. But I sort of found myself quite lonely and finding it difficult to go through that process. And so if you've got somebody like me on a podcast or of whatever the media stream may be, of talking about of somebody that's of in some people's eyes as sort of a sporting hero and a super person in some ways of what they've achieved. Actually, we're just normal people, the same as anybody else, and going through the same hang-ups and issues that everyone has to deal with at some point. And if I can help in a small way of pointing people in the right direction, or a direction where they can find out a little bit more about the issues that they may have, then that's got to be a good thing and not a bad thing.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, you talk about the thought processes you're having in 2012. Like, how did you actually come to a point of, right, I've got to deal with this? And how did you deal with it?
I don't think I really dealt with it at all until the sort of friend pointed me down the direction of Ted's Health.
Right.
Didn't talk and still haven't really talked about it with my wife or my kids, and they're all grown up of now and starting families of their own. I'm a grandfather now, which is really nice. But also makes you feel that you're a bit older, and another one of those squares have just been coloured in on that sheet of A4 again. But it does give you a bit of life and fun of seeing another youngster in the family, and okay, she's only 10 months or just over 10 months old now, so relatively. And my daughter does live down in Neath. Just outside Swansea, so it's not really on the doorstep from where we live in Marlow, but it is a fun part of life, and I want to make sure that I'm part of their lives and enjoying their youth growing up as well, and I want to be around as long as I possibly can to see that.
Yeah, amazing. Yeah, well, it's really interesting to hear you say that. I mean, obviously, well, as we discussed before we came on, what I do now in the personal development platform for men that we have is really, but is focused on men and coming into community and talking, and actually starting to this process of unraveling what's going on in our own heads, our own hearts, and it's really powerful. And I guess the word that most comes up is community. When people come to inside it, talk, and I guess that's sort of, I just want to throw that back to you. So what has community meant to you in this recovery period or through your life? Or do you find that you miss that intense rowing community now, and that's something that you would find useful in your life moving forward?
I suppose just going back a step before answering that question is that I did do something about it. I did go and see my GP eventually, 9 years on from of when the process started, and she was very good and helped sort of, but it was sort of okay, you've got clinical depression, you need of tablets, and move on that process. And I don't think it was really enough support at that time. Yes, they wanted me to go to therapy sessions, but I wasn't really ready for that. I wasn't really opening up in front of many people. So it wasn't until the Ted's Health process of came around that sort of the combination of the both sides really started to make an impact. Community is a very important part of my life. My mother was always involved in local community, putting youth clubs together. of giving the young people in this area the opportunity of doing stuff. And so seeing that from a family point of view of commitment of people like my mother, of going out and helping other people, where my father was very driven at work and doing what he needs to put the food on the table, a process, is that it was good family life of being seen from that point of view. And I suppose of being a diabetic, of going through the mental health issues, of being a sports person, of being able to sort of pass that knowledge on to the next generation. I briefly mentioned that I was coaching out in China. I was the high performance director of Chinese rowing, even a very different culture. I did that role for 4 years, was supposed to be still in that role up till Paris, but COVID made life even harder, of being away from home in another country, in lockdown, isolated. People talk about how bad it was here. You imagine of that being in China, where most of the people around you can't communicate with them at all. So that sense of community is very important in all our lives. I do enjoy playing golf, and so that a lot of sports people do go into golf because it's that competitive element as well that you were when you're a sports person. But it's a competitive element with yourself. Yes, you're trying to beat other people as well, but it is more about yourself. But being around other people is a great opportunity. You tend to sort of play more in your groups of friends that you have. But I try and go down and play a lot of club golf as well, sort of the roll-ups, once or twice a week, that they have of turning up of that. They're always love me having turn up because they can all beat me. So they love beating a 5 times Olympic gold medalist, which is always quite fun and humbling as well. But that sense of community of rowing, yes, I'm still part of it a bit, but it's not really a driving force in my life anymore as it was. It tends to be more of wider groups than ever before.
Thank you. I've got 2 more questions, if that's right.
Yeah, go ahead.
Have you found being famous isolating? So
Yes.
when you're talking about how it took you 9 years from realizing that you felt pretty low to going to the GP, do you think if you weren't famous, do you think there could have been more room to talk to people, or did you find that isolating and maybe even shameful in some capacity?
It's a very difficult question to answer because you don't really know, do you? That I don't believe in fate, but I do believe in opportunities. And as you sort of make your steps through life, you have doors in front of you, and you make a choice of which door you go through, and then that sort of puts you in avenues of other doors and other issues, and you weave your way through. People say to me, from a rowing point of view, would you have liked success earlier in your career? Yes, I would have done. At World Championship level, I won just about 50% of the World Championship events that I did. Matt Pinson won nearly enough all the World Championship events he did. Would I have liked my career to be more of that level? Yes, I would. But that may have changed the outcome of where if it came a little bit too easy, it may have not had the focus and drive that I needed within that. So I think you need that sort of process of working your way through. But I've always been a bit of a loner. I've always sort of been comfortable within my own skin around me. I don't know if that was brought in that one of my best friends died of a heart condition at my home at the age of 17, and that plays a big part in your process, and that of my mother felt it was good that I sort of had almost another friend to take his place, which was never going to happen. And so you sort of do isolate yourself in some way. So I may have been an isolated person in my DNA in the first place. So being famous, has that changed me? I'm more comfortable in small groups than big groups. I can communicate quite well on a one-to-one or in a smaller group. Bigger groups, I quite like to hide behind everything else. So you don't want to be the focus of the room, and I'm comfortable in that sort of situation. So of being somebody that's achieved externally, the scene of what you've achieved and done, is that does put a lot of pressure on. There is an expectation, a little bit I said about the golf, is that of their own self-esteem of being able to beat somebody that's 5 times Olympic gold medalist, that gives them a little bit of hope in their life. I do try and spin it around in some ways and saying, well, that I have won 5 Olympic gold medals. I did bobsleigh and became British champion. I have represented my country in golf. And of what are you good at sport wise? So I'm quite good at golf and not much else. And so that we find ourselves of helping our own mental health in some ways on the back of other people without trying to harm them, but we're always looking. The human race likes to be good at something, and I believe there is every individual, there is something out there that you can be good at and feel proud to be part of. You may not be the world's best at it, but something that gives you of focus, desire, and enjoyment to do. I honestly believe that. Sometimes people don't find that through the whole of their life, and that's a little bit sad in some ways. I've had great opportunities, and I've tried to give my 3 children the opportunity of widening their horizons in all sorts of different areas, sports and activities and drama, so that they can find their own direction of the direction they want. None of them wanted to row for obvious reasons. Their parents did it at the highest level, both competed at Olympic Games. My wife being the team doctor, trained as an orthopedic surgeon, my eldest daughter, who's got the right levers, going back to the beginning of the question of leverage, she's 6'2", perfect for the sport of rowing. But she said she was never going to row and never going to do medicine. She ended up going to Oxford University, doing medicine, and did do some rowing when she was there. So I'm glad she actually got into a boat. But then that was for her to decide of what direction to. Don't choose not to do it because your parents did it at the highest level. Choose because you don't want to go down that avenue. And so she's tried it and have gone off in her own direction. And so that element is, as I say, really difficult to answer. And I can't give you a definitive answer because those doors that I talked about may have opened in a different way. But my DNA of being a little bit of a hermit and a little bit of sort of introvert, I was probably that person anyway. So I wouldn't have been the sort of the life and soul of a party as it is now, that I prefer to be behind the camera than in the camera. I prefer to putting structure in place than being the spokesperson of something. That's my DNA. That's where I get my sort of motivation and kick. Of course, being involved in a lot of different charities over the years, they want you to be the media person in front of me, but that's not where I am as in my own skin. So long way around. I don't really know how to answer that question.
It was a great attempt. Thank you. I think what you're saying there, and also what you touched on, was talking about purpose and how important sort of that is to each individual. Whether whatever you're good at, try and find it. And I think that's really important in what I talk to a lot of men about in their 40s and 50s. He might be just thinking about, well, hang on, I'm sort of doing what I sort of, I opened that door age 20 and I'm still doing it age 40, 50, and it's not necessarily something I want to carry on with. And making those big decisions when there are, big responsibilities you talked about earlier about the mortgage and, various other things that, we're expected to pay for with kids and all the rest of it. So, but making that transition is difficult. And some, as you said, don't necessarily make it. And I think that sort of brings me around to my last question for you, which is, your legacy in terms of rowing is obviously secured for millennia. But how would you like your legacy to be remembered outside of rowing?
Again, it's a very difficult one to answer. I'm not very good at sort of looking at myself and from that point of view. When I came back from the Sydney Games, my father said that the local community, he's been approached and they want to build a statue of you. And there's an 8-foot bronze in Higginson's Park of me. And I said, I don't want a statue. And then they're saying, why? And he got quite offended from it because obviously very proud father, as I would be if it was one of my children. And I came out with a comment and said, well, the statues of dead people. I've still got quite a lot of life left. And then somebody else pointed out, actually, that statues will be around a lot longer than you will be an individual. And yes, you're right, is that there's a lot of statues of built of people after they've passed away, but there's quite a few that of see the statue of being put up. And so it's quite nice of having that recognition. That was unveiled by the Queen, which is even special on that as well. And so it's great, but it's quite a landmark within Marlow. And wherever I travel around the world, it is that people saying, "Oh, we've seen your statue." My standing joke is that it's a lot bigger than you are, and I'm saying, well, I'm trying to catch it up. But it's widthways, not heightways, that I'm catching it up on. And so that you are aware of what you've done in your life. I think of sporting wise, as you say, that's really taken care of, and I've been out of more Olympics now since I've retired than I actually competed at, and I took that to an extreme. I suppose in life is that of given some opportunities and taking those opportunities in the right way, of obviously sporting wise, but community wise, and helping other people. I've always, I suppose, have got a little bit of my, or a lot of my mum's DNA, that community spirit, and that where she's did it in our own very small community, is that I've been able to do that in a bigger forum because of what I've achieved in other parts of my life, and so I'm quite proud of that. When you've got former prime ministers that was prime minister at the time that contacts you about diabetes when she came down with diabetes, Theresa May this is, and asking your advice on it, you feel pretty privileged in that point of view. I could point her in the direction of the people that helped me to help her. Fortunately, when she stood down as Prime Minister, you get the opportunity of giving some awards out. And Ian Gallen, that helped me through my rowing career, at the end of my rowing career, to help me achieve my 5th Olympic gold medal, helped her in her life as well, and has been helping multiple people of all ages in their lives, as well as the high end of sport. Was ordered a New Year's honours for him. So I feel that he should have got that for helping me. But I hope he looks at it is that what he's done throughout his career in diabetes and fact finding from that point of view. So having those sort of little snippets of things that people come in. I get of emails, and I don't want to be opening the floodlights again for all that of areas where of colitis, diabetes, of low testosterone, things like that. I get contacted on a regular basis, and people saying thank you for being so honest and open in the direction, and that helps my own mental health. But that has also been quite rewarding of what you've done and what you've added to community.
Phenomenal. Trickle down wellness, trickle down well-being.
Yeah,
I love it.
And you don't realise at the time, but when you look back at it, it's easy, those emails coming through my website as they used to, and the thinking, okay, I'm not going to answer that, but I try and answer everyone. Not everyone's happy with the answers that I give them, but I do go to the process of trying to answer every single one of them.
Amazing. Steve, thank you so much. Thank you for answering my invitation to be on the Privileged Man podcast. I really appreciate your time. Thank you.
Thanks, Pete. Been enjoyable.